Afternoon. Can you see and hear us, sir?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. van den Bogerd. Can we pick up the issue of bugs, errors and defects, please, by turning up your witness statement, page 13. At the foot of the page, and you say in paragraph 29, the first time I recall becoming formally aware of any bugs, errors and defects in the Horizon IT system, BEDS, although this wasn't the term used at the time, was when the Post Office disclosed to Second Sight two anomalies, the receipts and payments mismatch problem and the local suspense account problem, which were detailed in the interim report of the 8th of July 2013. And then paragraph 30 over the page, please. First few lines. Prior to this, I was aware of general rumblings of complaints and concerns about the integrity of Horizon. And when you took over responsibility for the contract administration team, I became aware of claims the Horizon system itself was generating discrepancies in branches. Okay? Yes. So going back to paragraph 29, the foot of the page, what did you mean by becoming, quote, formally aware?
So in terms of the bugs themselves, that was the first time that I became aware. I say formally aware is that, I said rumblings, so I was aware that people were claiming that might be something wrong with the system, but it was only when those two bugs were disclosed that I became aware of bugs.
But we've looked already, I don't want to go back to it unless we have to, at the December 2010 email.
Yep.
By which email you were notified of the receipts and payments mismatch bug.
So I was notified in December 2010.
December 2010.
I wasn't. I don't recall that. So the receipts and so the document you took me to, which was that record of the discussion, I wasn't aware of that at the time.
Can we look, please, then at poll 308 8956? Second page. The remote access issue, second line of the quotation, came up when we were exploring solutions around a problem generated by the system following a migration to Horizon Online. This issue was quickly identified and a fix put in place, but it impacted around 60 branches, which meant a loss and gain incurred in a particular week, in effect disappeared from the system.
But as I've said, I don't recall seeing this at all. So for me, the first time of bugs, errors or defects, or whatever word that was being used, was when those two were disclosed to Second Sight as part of that work.
Again, are you shutting your mind to the receipt of this information because you know the difficulty that it creates for you?
No, not at all. I would, if I'd seen this and I remembered seeing it, I would have certainly, it would have been part of my consciousness going forward. I really cannot remember seeing this at all. And it was the first time was when Simon Baker produced those two anomalies, as he called them.
That can come down, thank you. Were you not aware at the time then, i.e. in October 2010, that Fujitsu formally notified the Post Office of the receipts and payment mismatch bug?
I wasn't aware of that.
The cross-reference for that, it needn't be displayed, is FUJ 308117. Were you not aware at the time that it happened then, again in October 2010, of a meeting? I showed you the agenda or the plan for the meeting earlier on between the Post Office and Fujitsu to discuss the receipts and payments mismatch bug.
I wasn't aware of that.
Sorry?
Sorry, I wasn't aware of that. I said I was in a different role in October, It was only when I came into the head of network services role, which brought in Lynn and John, that I started to get involved.
At the time then, you were not aware of the provision of notes concerning the receipts and payments mismatch bug to members of the legal team, the poll legal team, John L. Singh, Rob Wilson and Julian McFarlane,
No,
in the context of the Seema Misra case.
no.
You didn't know about that at the time.
It was much later that I heard about the Seema Misra case.
Did you know that a meeting was arranged in November 2010, including Dave Holbert, Mark Weaver, Mark Burley, Rod Ismay, Dave King, Will Russell, Ian Trundle, Emma Langfield, Lynn Hobbs, and Anita Taylor to discuss how to resolve the discrepancies generated by branches or at branches by the receipts and payments mismatch bug?
No, I don't believe I was. Can't
So
remember.
this all came as very significant new news to you in mid-2013, is that right?
In terms of the beds being disclosed, yes.
But were you aware at that time, in mid-2013, of any discussions within the Post Office senior management as to how high up within the organisation knowledge of the now 3-year-old payments and mismatch bug had gone?
No,
On the publication of the second site report, did you seek to ascertain when the Post Office first became aware of that bug?
sorry, the report that the two bugs were put into, the interim report we're talking
Yes.
about. Wait, no.
Did you seek to ascertain which departments or which individuals within the Post Office knew about that bug?
No.
Why not?
Because the way it was presented was that we've got these two bugs, so that was a surprise to me, and I was reassured that it's routine. We've dealt with them. It's been sorted, and I didn't push any further on it.
Were you aware that the suspense account bugs, which is the second of the two bugs, which you say Post Office made a disclosure about to the second site, had in fact been discovered by the Post Office in February 2012 before Fujitsu?
No.
Again, did you ask similar questions? What did we know about this bug? When did we first become aware of it? How high up within the organisation did knowledge go?
No.
In fact, Second Sight mentioned a third bug as well, the Calendar Square and Falkirk or Falkirk bug. That was known, we have evidence, by the Post Office way back in 2006. The cross-reference for that is FUJ 308 3721, no need to display that. Was your first knowledge of that when reading the Second Sight report?
I don't remember. So it was the two bugs that were disclosed was my first knowledge. I was aware of the third because there is some exchange in what's been disclosed that I was querying why we'd only given Second Sight 2 if we already knew about a third, but I didn't know about that third at the time.
If it was really the case that the Second Sight report revealed 3 bugs that you personally were not previously aware of, surely you would have wanted to know how that had happened.
So for the third one, I did question how have we only now realised that there's a third and we hadn't at the time, because if we'd become aware, and I wasn't involved in these conversations, but if we'd become aware that there were 2 bugs, which we were and we disclosed, then surely at that point we should have asked, are there any more? But I wasn't involved in those discussions.
Was there any kind of post-mortem which examined when did we, the Post Office corporately, know about these bugs for the first time, and what has been done with the knowledge that we had?
Not that I was aware of at the time. So the information that came, it was given to Second Sight. I'm not sure if anything else. I think I've seen something since in disclosure that said we did something, but I don't remember. I wasn't involved in those conversations.
What was your role at the time of the first Second Sight report?
So I'd been working alongside Ron, mostly, and Ian, on the spot reviews. So my role was really to facilitate the provision of information to Ron that they needed, and that's what I was doing, is going into the business to find out where the information was that we needed for that. In doing that, I was also looking at the situations myself, which is why I got involved in the Lepton case and understanding what had gone wrong in that case.
Were you leading for the post office?
Sorry, leading?
Yes. Were you the lead in the engagement with Second Sight?
Not the lead. I was there to assist in terms of provision of information to them.
Who was the lead in terms of the engagement with Second Sight?
Well, in terms of, they were engaged by Alice, Paula, and Susan was there at the time. So it was Susan, really, in terms of the overall lead, I would have said.
But you say you were in charge of or responsible for the provision of information to Second Sight from the post office?
Not formally. I was there to help them. But
who was in charge of the provision of information?
I don't know that we ever defined that. Because at the start, the whole engagement of Second Sight and the initial inquiry and then into the scheme, it kind of evolved over time. And even when we started in the scheme, we were developing it through the working group as we were going forward. So I don't believe there was any roles defined at the start.
At this time, this is before July the 8th, 2013, did you yourself consider what impact, if any, the revelation of the existence of 3 bugs in the system may have had on the criminal prosecutions that the Post Office had mounted, sometimes successfully, over the previous decade?
No, I didn't. I had no knowledge of. I mean, I knew we had a security investigation team, and I knew that we were bringing the prosecutions ourselves. That was always, well, it wasn't always known to me, but that became known to me quite early on. But I had no, other than being reassured that everything done, there was a proper process for prosecutions, that it was done in line with the code code for prosecution for prosecutors. I had no insight into that, so I made no connection from those bugs to the previous convictions.
Whose responsibility was it to make a connection between the bugs and the prosecutions?
That would be the legal team.
And who within the legal team?
I'm not really. I mean, in terms of my contact with legal was mostly Roderick Williams, and I had very little contact with Janelle, and then Andrew Parsons from WBD or Bond Dickinson or wherever they were at the time.
So just to be clear, on the publication of the Second Sight report, which mentions the 3 bugs, you're not aware of any investigation or introverted look by the Post Office as to when we found out about these bugs and what did we do in relation to them?
I don't think I was at the time. I've seen things through disclosure that we were looking at past cases, but I wasn't involved in that.
You tell us in paragraph 30 of your witness statement, we've read it already, that you were aware before July 13 of general rumblings of complaints.
Yep.
Had that been for the entirety of your time in the Post Office?
No.
Since Horizon was introduced in about 2000?
No. So it was really around the 2010, around that time. So I think it was really when I took on responsibility for the contracts team, And I think at that time, or thereabouts, there was the Inside Out programmes. There were a couple of TV programmes, one in the south and one in the Midlands, I think.
So the rumblings that you speak about, as you call them, is from about 2010 onwards?
Yes. I mean, there had been some postmasters saying that it must be the system, but not that I could have put my finger on at the time.
What do you mean not? You could, what could you not put your finger on?
Not that I can remember where I'd heard that in terms of there are some issues. It was really around the 2010, 2011 where I started really getting involved.
Let's have a look then. Can we start by looking at poll 0017 8171? If we can look at the foot of the page, please. This is 2004. And just remind us, in 2004, your job would have been?
So I was head of area for the rural network in Wales.
So the rural agency in Wales?
Yes.
And there's an email from Jill Campbell-John, the Contract Support Centre Manager, under the heading Lower Eggleton. And she says, I've passed the file you sent to Richard Ashcroft in problem management for one of his team to look at and request information from Fujitsu Services. I do think that a telling point in this case is that there are no calls to the helpline logged. I would have thought that if he, I think that's a sub-postmaster, believed he had a problem, he would have done that quite promptly. It's a bit amazing that the accountant from a couple of doors away knows enough about Horizon to put his name to the assertion that it's a system problem. However, whilst I believe there's no evidence to support system problems, I don't want to make sweeping assumptions and would rather be certain when the circumstances may lead to termination of contract. Richard or one of his team will be in touch in due course. And then top of the page, Mr. Ashcroft emails you and says he agrees with Jill. He's got one of his team onto it, who he's asked to put together a checklist of obvious things that have caused this discrepancy in the branch. If we can discount those, it gives us a greater level of confidence that it really is postmaster error. And he asks you whether you have any timescales on this. So, first of all, why was this being raised with you?
So Lower Eggleton, even though that's not in Wales, it was Wales and the Marches, so that would have come under the area that I was responsible for.
So this is a sub-postmaster raising an issue of Horizon system error as a possible cause of a discrepancy and had seemingly deployed the view of an accountant to support his view.
Yeah.
Yes?
So I'd forgotten about this until I had this in disclosure. I do remember meeting with Steve Morgan, and this brought it back. I can't remember, I didn't get disclosed his initial request, whether it came in writing, but back then I would have had somebody working more closely with the branches, and I was overseeing.
Does this fall into the category of a rumbling?
Well, I mean, this was back in 2004. Mr. Morgan has obviously raised concerns, and I didn't know where to go with those concerns. And then I've reached out because I didn't know Jill Campbell-John at the time. And that was me trying to, so he wanted some information from the system. And then I've reached out to see where can we get that information for him, and I provided that to him.
So would this be an early rumbling?
Yes.
And do you know what was done as a result of it?
So I've obviously, I sent a letter to him, which I saw in disclosure. I've provided him with the Horizon logs, as he requested. And I don't remember. I mean, I'd asked him to then make good the loss, unless he could establish something within that. But from the information I had from this team, there was nothing in those logs that pointed to the Horizon system. But I don't recall what happened after that.
Let's have a look then at poll 00142481. Is this the letter that you wrote
Yes.
to Mr. Morgan?
That's the one I've seen, yes.
Of the 1st of March 2004, saying you've been supplied with a copy of the transaction log and event log to enable you further to analyse the cause of the discrepancy of £1,400. I initiated a further analysis of these logs, which reaffirmed that there is no evidence of a Horizon-created discrepancy. The Horizon system will not create a discrepancy solely by the user correcting an error they've previously made. In this specific case, reversing an incorrect remittance out of cheques provided that the cash figure is declared is correct, the cheque figure held in stock is correct, and the remittance out cheque figure is correct against the physical cheques dispatched to Data Central, all of which appear to be in order. My letter previously gave you until a date to make good the loss or provide supporting evidence that this discrepancy was generated by a systems error and not a user error. Please provide the evidence or make good the loss. Yes?
Yes.
When you were asked to become involved in this, did you wish to understand what the root cause of the discrepancy was?
So I wanted to provide the information that Mr. Morgan had requested so that he could understand what had gone on in his branch.
That's a slightly different thing. I'm asking, did you want to
So
seek to understand the root cause?
So back in 2004, there wasn't a facility to investigate branch issues like we introduced in the scheme. It was very much the postmaster was required to produce the evidence to dispute the loss that had been sustained in his branch.
How would a postmaster produce evidence to dispute the loss in relation to a computer system to which he had no access?
So he did have access to the computer system. It would have been for 42 days back in those days. And then he reached out to me to be able to get some more information for him, which is what I've done. So at this point, I've assisted as much as I could. I say I did meet with Mr. Morgan, so I don't know if I've done anything further because I can't see any. I've had nothing else disclosed, and I really don't remember. But I do remember going to his branch and meeting with him.
So you asked Fujitsu to produce the logs for the case, yes?
So I asked our team, because Jill Campbell-John isn't Fujitsu, and then they've reached out to Fujitsu. So when I made some, because I said I didn't know where to go with this, when I made some inquiries about where do I go to get the information, I was directed towards Jill Campbell-John, and her team, I assumed at the time, were that liaison point into Fujitsu.
Do you accept, knowing what you know now, that it's not possible to identify system errors from the logs that were produced alone?
I think if there was something in the logs that, missed a transaction or something, but I think, from a postmaster's perspective, they wouldn't have known what to look for. And in 2004, I wouldn't have known what to look for either.
Well, I was about to ask, were you qualified to look at the logs?
No. So
Who was?
So it was the team, Jill and, I think it was Richard, again, who I don't know that person. That was the team. I was looking to them for the expertise to be able to provide the information to Mr. Morgan. And when I referred to, I've initiated further analysis, it was from them that information came.
And how were they qualified to analyse the logs to identify whether a system error caused the discrepancy?
I don't know. I don't know even if they were.
But that they were qualified?
I don't know if they were or not. But that was the point of contact I was directed to within the business.
Okay, I'll move on. Can we look, please, at poll 00178219? We're still in March 2014. We will see in a moment. Can we look at pages 3 to 4, please? And if we look at the foot of 3, thank you, there is an email to you. We can just see at the end if we scroll right to the end. From Clive Burton, from the former sub-postmaster accounts team, Agents Debt 3 in Chesterfield. Just help us what they were, what that team was.
It was within a PMBA team in Chesterfield.
And do you know what the agent debt?
I didn't at the time. I mean, I have since because I...
Okay, let's see what Mr. Burton says. Mrs. Pugh, this is the sub-postmistress at Cherbury Post Office, from the 21st of April 99 to the 3rd of September 01, when her contract for services was suspended. The final audit resulted in a deficiency of £9,000 odd, but many error notices were later issued, which increased the overall debt to £31,000 odd. Recovery's been referred to Jim Cruz of Legal Services to pursue. Case management conference was heard on the 8th of January 2004, and some directions have been made. Our Legal Services Department have asked us to prepare a number of statements regarding various accounting errors that form part of the debt. We're in the process of preparing these. There are a number of other issues our legal department require clarification on, and statements are needed. It would be very much appreciated if you could provide assistance with the following items, or say who to contact. 1, the defence alleges that the introduction of the Horizon system itself caused problems, and evidence is needed about the training given to Mrs. Pugh, and if possible, evidence of the call logs to show whether Mrs. Pugh was seeking help in relation to the operation of the system. Telephone link was cut between February and June 01, and a statement about closure of the office. And then over the page, general statements required as to how the accounting system works at a sub-post office and how documents are created. So going back to the previous page at the foot, point 1, the defence alleges that Horizon itself caused problems. Yes?
Yes.
Would this be amongst the category of rumblings?
From my memory, yes. Because when this, and again, I didn't remember this, but when I did request further disclosure to see what I did with this, and I've concluded that this, for me at that point, was just a routine request for information. So I forwarded on to a contracts manager that was part of my team.
So if we just go up on page 3, please. Is that the email, Emlyn,
Yes.
could you deal, please?
Yeah, so Emlyn Hughes was a contracts manager working within my team at the time, and he was more familiar to where to go for the information, which is what he's done. He's reached out to a number of places.
And I think we can see further up the chain that you, on the 23rd of March and then on the 8th of April, appear to have received a list of call logs from MBSC in relation to Cherbury between 2000 and 2004. Yes? So if you look at the middle of page 1.
Middle of page 1. Yes, so
So
the
it's just
Emlyn,
coming, if we scroll down,
I think
attached are the call logs between those two dates from this office. Yes?
yes. So this was the provision of information. I've been copied into some and not all of them, I think.
Can we then see what Mr. Hughes did at poll 00178225? top of the page, so we can see your email, Emlyn, can you deal? He says, having spoken with Glenn regarding the issue below, and in particular regarding the Horizon question, he suggested I contact you, mentioned you supported several offices within the former Chester cluster. So if it's possible, you went to Cherbury and provided assistance to Mrs. Hugh in the early days. So asking a question was somebody who went out to the former Chester cluster to provide assistance as to whether or not he went to that branch. Is that right?
From that, I can see from that email, yes.
Do you know what happened after this in relation to this sub-postmistress, Mrs. Pugh, who had raised in her defence in county court litigation, Horizon being the problem because of a system fault?
I don't know what happened after this.
Was this not the kind of issue that ought to have triggered some investigation, a full and thorough investigation?
So the investigation would have been done by the investigation team at this point. So anything into a criminal case, it was the security investigation team that would have done that.
This isn't about a criminal case. This is about a civil recovery.
Oh, sorry.
Seeking to recover £31,000 from Mrs. Pugh.
I don't know. I mean, this was the first. This was, for me, was a routine request because in 2001 we'd moved from a regionalised structure into the head of area structure. I don't know what date. I think it was probably around this date, and then all the branch files were distributed into the head of area, and then they were reaching out for information. The information they required didn't sit within my team, which is why I'd asked Emlyn to facilitate the provision of information. So I'm not aware of what or if any investigation was done into that at the time.
Do you think some sort of investigation should have been done if in legal proceedings the sub-postmistress is saying the loss that you're seeking to recover from me, £31,000, was in fact caused by the Horizon system?
Yep.
This is as early as 2004.
Yes, it should have been done.
Do you think it should have been an independent investigation, i.e. independent of the post office?
Well, I'm not sure about independent of the post office, but there should have been an investigation within the post office. But from my working knowledge and my memory, there certainly wasn't a function that did that back then. And it was only when we started working with Second Sight and I started to bring that team together that we pulled together, from my perspective, we pulled together the knowledge and the know-how to be able to put to deal with this type of request in terms of what has happened, and can we understand what the cause of the loss is. But I don't think it would have been done back then.
But why not, is my question. We've seen a couple of examples now that happen to concern you in the roles that you performed relatively early on in the life of Horizon, with sub-postmasters raising the suggestion that the loss attributed to them is in fact caused by Horizon. But why was something not done to investigate that?
I think it would have depended on the particular area that was in at the time. So this would have been Chester at the time that she was raising issues. Then I would have expected the Chester cluster to have done something with it. But there wasn't a formal approach. There wasn't anything documented. There wasn't any policy on it. It was very much, it's up to the postmaster to show that they're not responsible for the loss. That's very much how it was.
And why was it like that? Who decided that it should be like that?
Because that was what was in the contract. That's how the contract was.
What are you thinking of in particular in the contract?
So I think, when I came into, I'd started.
That document can come down, by the way.
Sorry, when I started in the directly managed or Crown network, so I came in through that route, and then when I came out of the branch structure and came into working with sub-postmasters, there were lots of things that weren't documented. They weren't policies, they weren't approaches, and then there was change of structures. And I think it very much depended on the people within those areas in terms of the level of support that were given to postmasters at the time. So, when I came out of that directly managed and came into my area of postmasters, then I was able to assist in some cases because I had the knowledge. With Horizon, in terms of providing the information, I had to go to where I was directed to get the information. But my view is there should have been a function to do that back then, and there wasn't.
What in the contract did you think placed an obligation on the sub-postmaster to show that a loss was caused by the system rather than him or her? You said a moment ago
Well, not by
it
the
was the wording of the contract.
Yeah, so there's nothing in the contract that mentioned the system at all. I mean, the contract had been in place for some time before the Horizon system was introduced.
Did you know that the contract only required sub-postmasters to make good losses if it was through their error or negligence?
Yes. Yeah, I mean...
So why do they have to prove anything? Why does the post office not have to prove that the loss was through the sub-postmaster's error or negligence?
So I think back then the assumption was that if there was a loss in the branch, that it was the responsibility of the postmaster.
Why was there an assumption?
Because it was assumed it was user error.
I'm sorry?
Because it was assumed it was
Yes,
user
why? There's a lot of
error.
assuming going on.
No, absolutely, I agree. There was.
But why? Why does a multi-million-pound business make assumptions when it's got a written contract that prescribes the circumstances in which a sub-postmaster is liable?
So looking back, there was no provision for the Horizon system. There was no change to working practices. As I said, when for Mr. Morgan in Lower Eggleton, there was no process for me to go and get information. I had to find a contact to do that. So there was no change in terms of policy or process or working practices that I was aware of at the time.
That, with respect, Ms. Brandon Bogerd, doesn't really answer the question. Did nobody read the contract and think, hold on, this contract says we can only recover money from sub-postmasters in these limited circumstances? The sub-postmasters have to prove nothing.
That was the advice that we were getting from legal at the time.
Who in legal?
From our legal, back then it would have been Royal Mail.
Yes, who in Royal Mail?
I didn't get involved in the early days, but I think when I first started getting involved, it was around 2011, which is when we had the Shoesmiths case, and it would have been, and I didn't know, I've never met any of them actually, but it would have been those on the copy list. It would be Mandy Talbot, I think Rebecca Mantle, probably Rob Wilson, I think, but these are people I didn't have routine contact with at all.
Was it the case that you very well knew that the contract did not entitle the post office to recover money from sub-postmasters in any or all circumstances, but that's what the post office pretended it said? We've seen in the inquiry, Ms. Vanden Bogart, many letters to sub-postmasters which say just that. You're responsible to make good any losses, ignoring the terms of the contract completely.
So if I go back to, I was in Network, and that's where I was, and it was the management of the letters and the breaches of contract was managed within Network. Through it changed over time, but it was primarily the contract managers, but it was always under the direction and the instruction of the legal team. So there was a very close working relationship between the contract managers and that legal team around what they should and shouldn't do.
You mentioned what happened or what changed in 2011 when the Shoesmiths claims were threatened. Can we turn to that, please? Poll 00294879. This is a briefing document or a proposed response to challenges regarding the Horizon system. It's from Mr. Ismay, we can see. It's dated the 12th of October 2011, and it's addressed to you, yes?
Yes.
And others, and copied to others. We can see the heading is the JFSA and Shoesmith's Access Legal, which was essentially part of Shoesmith's response to challenges regarding the Horizon System, proposed steering group and purpose. Were you, you, I think, at this time held a very senior position, the head of network.
It was quite senior. It wasn't very senior, but it was quite senior. So I reported into, I think, Sue Huggins at this point, who reported into Kevin Gilland. So it was two levels down below exec director.
We can see that what Mr. Ismay is proposing to define and manage a coordinated response plan which defends existing challenges and deters future challenges in the most pragmatic and efficient manner. Do you know why that was the proposed strategy, to deter future challenges?
I don't actually. So as I said previously, this was me coming into this space quite new, and I think the only reason I was in this was because of my involvement with the Ferndown case, and my moving into the role that took on responsibility for the contracts.
But do you know why a business would not instead have as its purpose to examine on their merits any challenges that its agents may bring?
Well, it should have. I mean, this is a very biased kind of view from Rod when he's put this together.
And just looking further up on the distribution list, do you know whether any of those people, many of whom we're familiar with, said, hold on, Rod, this is a biased view? So
the senior people in here, Mike Young, exec director, Kevin Gilland, sorry, the format's gone, I can't really read it. It's obviously Susan.
Yeah, so Mike Young, COO.
Yeah, Susan, legal and compliance director, but general counsel as I knew her. So Chris Day, chief finance officer. Sue, I think, was my line manager at the time. John Scott was very senior. So these are all very senior people in here, and I don't recall that anybody challenged anything here, but they might have. I don't know. So this was me.
Did you challenge it?
I didn't. This was me stepping into this as a new person in this arena.
That purpose, that strategy that's set out there, that was the strategy that the Post Office maintained largely until you left, wasn't it?
I don't know. I disagree. I think, and you know what I tried to do especially was try to get under the skin of what had happened in branches and to investigate those cases. So I wouldn't say I was in this space at the start in this anyway. I didn't challenge it because I said I came into this new, but as I left, I was clearly into a different space.
Let's look at what Mr. Ismay said under background. Throughout the last 10 years, the Horizon System has been subject to a number of unfounded criticisms in the national press. Reading this at the time, would you have known what that suggestion was based on?
No. I mean,
criticisms were unfounded.
Sorry, which bit?
That criticisms were unfounded.
So I think this comes back to my earlier comment about rumblings. You know, I was aware of some things, very few. This was me coming more into a national view of this because everything prior to this had been very contained within my area of work, as opposed to because there wasn't anything on a kind of business level at that point. So this was me first seeing this at the national level for the first time, I think.
It's also faced questions in the Houses of Parliament and allegations in court by former sub-postmasters and their legal defence teams. Post Office has consistently won its prosecutions, and presiding judges have made statements which had been expected to deter further baseless allegations. However, the challenges continue to be made. Did you know whether the statement, the Post Office has consistently won its prosecutions, was true or false?
I would have no understanding of that at the time.
Would you have just accepted that on its face, that the Post Office
Yeah.
had consistently won its prosecutions?
I would have taken that at face value, yes.
Did you know of any presiding judges that had made statements that it had been hoped might deter baseless allegations, but despite the work of the judges, the challenges continue to come?
Not that I could recall.
Again, would you have taken what Mr. Ismay said as being true?
At this point, I would have, yes.
The situations have arisen in a minority of cases where the Post Office has dismissed the sub-postmaster for financial irregularities, and the sub-postmaster has claimed that it was the accounting records that were wrong due to IT issues rather than the money had been stolen. Shoesmiths are acting for several former sub-postmasters who have come together in the GFSA. The Post Office has received commonly worded letters before action. These are precursors to claims for damages. They request significant materials. The Post Office had around 20 cases which it wished to take to court where the defence blamed Horizon. Do you know what that's a reference to? Cases that the Post Office wanted to take to court?
No. I would have no knowledge of the cases at that point.
The Post Office is confident that Horizon isn't at fault. Do you know on what basis that statement was made, the confidence that Horizon was not at fault?
No, other than that was the understanding within the business.
You refer in your statement to that the messaging coming from the business, the messaging from the Post Office.
Yeah.
Which individual person was giving you that messaging?
There wasn't an individual person. I remember when Horizon was installed and rolled out, that the message was, this is the most secure, the largest and the most secure system in Europe. And I don't know who said that, but I always remembered that. And that in itself gave confidence in that system. But I can't say that I ever remember a particular person, but that was the general messaging, and certainly the feeling, what was believed within the organisation.
So you can't identify an individual?
No, and it would have been over a number of years. It wouldn't have been, just one person. That was the understanding, genuine understanding within the organisation at the time that I was aware of. I mean, there's parts of the organisation I wasn't aware of that I've since seen quite damaging documents on, but I wasn't aware of that.
What are you referring to there?
Well, just the comments in, the receipts and mismatch, those type of, we need to keep this quiet. We don't want the Horizon integrity to become known. Those are the things I'm referring to.
I mean, when we ask questions of those people at those levels, they say it was the people above us that were telling us that Horizon is the largest system outside defence in Europe. It's very secure, processes X million transactions a day, Y billion transactions a year. There's no faults with Horizon. It's been independently assessed. Auditors have given it a clean bill of health. It was the people above us, you, people of your level, that were passing that messaging down to us.
Well, it wasn't me at my level then, because I wasn't at that level. But just looking at, I mean, if you look at the distribution list on here, I was one of the more junior people on this list. As I said, I just started to come into this, and therefore I wouldn't have challenged, and I would have taken everything at face value at this time because I was new to this space.
I think you were responsible for communicating the Post Office's messaging to ministers or members of Parliament.
No, not at this time.
Did you not attend meetings with MPs?
I would have, but not at this time. So in terms of the meetings I attended, in terms of the meeting I attended with MPs, it was it was 2012, as we were getting into that the second site investigations, and obviously we've got documents that refer to those. Prior to this, I would have been working in a regionalised role. I might have had some local meetings with MPs, but it would have been other normal kind of business that I can't remember exactly, but it was in 2012 that I really started getting involved in this.
You met, I think, with MPs twice, on the 10th of May 2012 and the 18th of June 2012.
That's correct.
And that was prior to the Second Sight interim report, obviously a year before then.
It was before Second Sight had been engaged, actually.
And can we look at the second of those meetings, which you attended with, I think, 6 MPs, including James Arbuthnot, by looking at JARB 601. Can you see the attendee list?
Yes.
Scroll down a little bit, we can see that it includes you. And this is the minute of the meeting of the 18th of June. Can we look, please, at the foot of page 1? Alice Perkins, then the chairman of the company, gave background information and the post office's perspective. It's a completely separate entity. She became aware of the issue when she joined in August 2011. It was very serious. The post office recognised full well that the matter was very serious for sub-postmasters and mistresses. Over the page. Second paragraph said that the matter involved treading a tightrope regarding questions of money. The post office and its staff are stewards of large quantities of cash. The cash does not belong to the post office. It's in transit as it comes through the post office. There is the issue of trying to not put temptation in people's way. And then Ms. Venables begins by saying that temptation is an issue, but that trust in the post office as a brand is absolutely paramount. Were you involved in briefing Ms. Venables or Ms. Perkins for this meeting?
Not in relation to the narrative you're seeing here. So what I'd been asked to do for the May meeting was, there were 2 cases that they wanted me to be able to pull the information together on, to be able to talk through at the first meeting. And the 2 cases was it was the Joe Hamilton Tracy Merritt case, and because they were their constituents for both of those MPs. That was what I was asked to do. And then that flowed. The June meeting was a follow-up to that May meeting with an extended audience. So my involvement was not in pulling together the briefing information, other than my specific slot on the agenda, as it were.
Were you party to any discussion with either or both of Ms. Perkins or Ms. Venables beforehand, in which it was decided that the thing that should be mentioned is the temptation that faces sub-postmasters?
No.
We should try and drop a little poison in the MP's ears, drip a little poison in the MP's ears.
Not at all. I wasn't part of that conversation.
Was there a deliberate strategy to put that idea in the MP's mind right at the beginning of the meeting, focusing on the temptation faced by sub-postmasters?
I don't think there was, but I can't comment. I mean, if I go back to the May meeting, I wasn't in all of the meeting with the MPs, so the format or the running order was that Alice and Paula, and I'm not sure if Alwyn actually met with James Arbuthnot, as he was then, and Oliver Letwin, both MPs. The agenda had a number of people on there. I was one of them, and I had a slot. So basically, we were waiting outside the meeting room or in the cafe area of the building, I think, and we were called in to do our slot. So I wasn't party to the preamble for that meeting.
Ms. Venables continues of the 11,800 employed, only a tiny number are presenting cases where there's an issue of alleged fraud. Problem is therefore relatively very small. The Horizon system is very secure. Every keystroke used by anyone using the system is recorded and auditable. Did you know that that was the case?
Not firsthand, no.
Did you believe what she said, that every keystroke
I did.
used by anyone using the system is recorded and auditable?
I believed that was my CEO. I had no reason not to believe her.
Do you know who briefed her?
I don't. What would normally happen is that the briefing would come from the relevant departments. I would have expected it to come from our IT function, and that would have been, I think Leslie was the Chief Information Officer at the time.
Would you expect, therefore, that to come from Leslie Sewell, the Chief Information Officer?
That would be my expectation, but I don't know if that happened.
Can we move on in the meeting, please, to page 3? One of the MPs, Andrew Bridgen, at the top of the page, asked whether there had been any case where the discrepancy was the fault of the system. And you see 3 passages up from the foot of the page that's being displayed there. Paula Venell said that going back to Andrew Bridgen's question, there had not been a case investigated where the Horizon system had been found to be at fault. Did you know whether that was true or false?
I didn't know either way. I believed it to be true because that's what she said, but I didn't know either way.
Do you know who briefed her, if she was briefed to say that?
I don't know. I mean, if it depends what she's referring to as a case. If she's talking about a criminal case, then I would have expected that briefing to come from someone in the legal department. But it's not specific, and I don't know. I'd be speculating.
Can we go back to page 2 in that connection, please? At the foot of, there we are, at the foot of what Ms Venell said there, every case taken to prosecution that involves the Horizon system thus far has found in favour of the Post Office. Did you know whether that was true or false?
I didn't know either way.
Would you believe it because your CEO was saying it?
Yes.
Do you know who briefed her, if anyone, to say that?
Again, I don't know who, but I would have expected that to come from the legal team, given it was talking about prosecution specifically.
I think it follows that you wouldn't have been aware at this time, in June 2012, that at least 3 sub-postmasters had in fact been acquitted.
I wouldn't have known.
Did you know about the case of Nicola Arch, accused of stealing £32,000 and unanimously acquitted by a jury at Bristol Crown Court?
That's not a name I'm familiar with.
Having said that the system was at fault for the alleged shortfall and that she had repeatedly reported the matter to the helpline but had got absolutely nowhere with them.
I wasn't aware of that case.
Were you aware of the case of Susan Palmer, who'd been acquitted by a jury in Southend Crown Court in January 2007 and had said in her defence that the Horizon system was responsible for the loss and simultaneously prevented her from challenging any Horizon figures with which she had not agreed?
No, and again, it's not a name I'm familiar with.
Were you aware that in 2006 in Northern Ireland, a lady called Maureen McKelvey was acquitted by a jury?
No.
And that in the course of her trial it had come to light that an area manager, her area manager, had experienced problems with balancing Horizon at her terminal when she had come in to examine the system?
Wasn't aware of that at all.
Who would be responsible for, putting it neutrally, fact-checking the type of information that Miss Venells is telling a collection of MPs here? Every case involving Horizon that's been taken to prosecution has found in favour of the Post Office, when that's just false. Who'd be responsible for putting together information that would allow a CEO to say something like this?
I'm not sure whether there was one person overall with overall responsibility. My experience of how the business worked was that there might be somebody holding the pen on the brief, but they would then reach out to the relevant directors or heads of in those particular areas to get the appropriate response. So looking at this, I would have expected this to go into the legal team.
But put it another way, Ms van der Bogerd, would you expect careful and diligent checks to have been made before going on the front foot?
Absolutely.
Because that's what this is. This is going on the front foot, isn't it? It's facing the MPs down.
Yep.
It's saying, move along, MPs. There's nothing to see here. That's what this.
Yeah.
That's what that line's saying, isn't it?
Well, I mean, say in every case, that's quite a strong opening statement. So I agree.
It's the kind of information where she's using the court system as a prop, almost. It's not just us bringing cases. It's the juries and the court system that's finding them guilty. You can be assured, MPs, that there's nothing to see here.
I can't disagree with that.
It's consistent with Mr. Ismay's plan as well of 2011, isn't it? Robustly defend in the hope of deterring further challenge.
In terms of his purpose, his opening, yeah, I agree.
You can't help us to establish the steps that were taken to confirm the veracity of the information given to members of Parliament here.
I wasn't involved, so I don't know where the information's come from. I'm not actually sure who held the pen on the brief.
Thank you. So I wonder whether we could take a break there. I think it's between 5 to and 3 o'clock. I wonder whether we could break until 10 past.
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms van der Bogerd, can we look at the briefing for the meeting that we were just talking about on the 18th of June 2012 by looking at poll 3027722? And was it common, I think you're familiar with this document, was it common for a briefing pack like this to be put together for any significant meeting in particular with MPs?
Yes, it was.
This is, I think, 33 odd pages long. You can see that there's an index at the front. If we go to page 2, the attendee list is set out, and then proposed agenda is set out with the lead from the post office or the MPs being identified and the minutes to be allocated to their speaking part. And as you said already, you were slated to deal with 2 cases.
That's correct.
And if we go over the page to the 3rd page, please, we can see Mr. Arbuthnot was going to give an introduction, and then, as in fact happened, Ms. Perkins was to speak. And would you understand these to be, it's entitled Key Messages, it's essentially a speaking note.
Yes.
And if we can look at that page, please, as well as looking at JARB 601. Thank you. And so we can see that the overall introductions were indeed given by Mr. Arbuthnot, and then Alice Perkins did speak. And you can see that to an extent she follows the briefing or the speaking note. You can see second bullet point on the right, take this issue very seriously. Her second paragraph of the minute, very serious one for the post office. Mention of reputation, which equates to the second bullet point, yes?
Yes.
And then you can see her last line of the minute, very serious for sub-postmasters and mistresses, involved as it was invariably life-changing, equates to second bullet point, this impacts the lives of individuals. Yes?
Yes.
And then go over the page on the left-hand side, please. Enormous change at the post office, tightrope regarding questions of money. Money is mentioned in the second bullet point on the right. Public money is at stake. And then there's the line, there is the issue of trying not to put temptation in people's way. That doesn't appear to be something that she was briefed to say, does it?
It wasn't included in the briefing, the initial briefing pack.
Was there another version of this briefing pack then?
Not that I'm aware
I think this is
of.
the latest iteration of the one that we've been given.
That's what I believe, yeah.
And just help us with these things. When you're going into a meeting like this, is there, in addition to the formal briefing, a kind of a scrum down beforehand in which people exchange ideas and come up with additional lines?
There might be in some occasion. If there was on this one, I wasn't involved in it. But as ever, these are briefing packs, or they're not meant to be scripts. They're meant to be, this is what we'd like you to think we should be covering.
Thank you. I'm just looking, going to examine the three things that I've highlighted in the meeting. The temptation spoken to by Miss Venables and Miss Perkins. The line, every case taken to prosecution involving Horizon has found in favour of the post office. Mm-hmm. And the line, there's never been a case investigated where Horizon has been found to be at fault. And just see whether any of those three big claims appear in any of the briefing notes that were distributed before the meeting. So if we go to what Ms. Venel says, so if we turn over the page on the right-hand side, please. Confirm above, postmasters are key to our business. Support our branches, we have a help desk. Horizon is used in branches to manage accounting. Sub-postmaster has any questions or concerns. She's confident about the integrity of Horizon, built on robust principles of reliability and integrity, undergone many external audits, and no problems of this nature have ever been raised. On a technical level, then there are 3 bullet points. Occasionally we get incidents of fraud. This is unfortunate as it's public money at stake. It's important we protect it. Even in cases of fraud, we do try to treat the agent with care and respect. And so the line about every case taken to prosecution that involves the Horizon system has found in favour of the post office was not part of her briefing either, was it?
No.
And then if we go to page 3 on the left-hand side, please. The line in the middle of the page, Paula Venel said that going back to Andrew Brigden's question, there had not been a case investigated where Horizon had been found at fault. That doesn't seem to be part of her briefing either, does it?
Not from the other document, no.
And so I'll ask again, to your recollection, was there anything done outside the preparation of this 33-page briefing pack for Miss Perkins and Miss Venels to give them information to deploy at the meeting?
Not that I'm aware of or can recall. Paula and Alice might have decided to meet themselves.
Sorry, say again?
I said Paula and Alice might have decided to get together themselves if they wanted to discuss kind of what they were going to cover. But I don't recall, but I don't remember being in another meeting. Because normally, you'd have a prep meeting, and then you would go into the actual meeting. So, sorry, I
No, I'm just trying to examine where these three big claims come
Yeah.
from. It's all about the temptation. We've never lost a case. Horizon never been found to be at fault. Where they came from?
I can't see from the information that they've come out of this. I mean,
No.
there seems to have been from...
You were in the meeting. Did you think,
I was in...
hold on, goodness me, Paula Venables is gone off the reservation here.
So for this meeting, which is different to the May meeting, I was in the whole of this meeting. So it wasn't as if I just came in for the slot. I was actually in all of this meeting. It's not unusual from my experience for, you know, there to be a briefing pack or speaking note that the person who's then that was directed at might change it without feeding back to the rest of the attendee, as in the rest of us. It's not, that wasn't unheard of. So
Freestyling.
well, I wouldn't say freestyling, but I suppose adding their own potential emphasis. Or
These aren't points of emphasis, are they?
in terms of,
They're big claims, aren't they?
no, I'm saying in terms of how they would normally approach. I'm not saying in this case. I'm just saying in general
Okay,
terms.
well, let's look at this case. You couldn't really say these are points of emphasis, can you?
So, I mean, they've chosen to shine the spotlight on to certain aspects of the briefing pack and bring it more to the fore, is what I'd say. But
None of these are in the briefing pack.
no, well, there's the touches on some of it, the general theme, but
Go back to the left-hand side, please, on page 2. Every case taken to prosecution that involves Horizon thus far is found in favour of the Post Office. Where is that touched on in the briefing pack?
other than reference to occasional incidents of fraud.
That's a completely different point. That's about the incidents of fraud. What Ms Venables is recorded as having said is when the cases get to court, we always win.
Sorry, I was involved in the briefing pack. I was involved in that. I don't recall anything in between to get to the final version. So I think I would just be speculating. But I don't remember any further conversations to say we're actually going to dial this up or dial this down.
That's what I'm asking, largely in advance of Miss Venables and Miss Perkins coming to give evidence to us. Was there an occasion, to your knowledge, at which the information we see, let's tell them about temptation, let's tell them about Horizon always winning in court, the Post Office always winning in court, let's tell them that when any Horizon case has been examined, it's never been found to be at fault?
So I remember this meeting. I remember the May meeting. I remember the prep meetings. I don't remember anything else in between. And just going back to what we've said, out of the three things, the bit about temptation is the one that I would have said something on. I mean, I wouldn't have been aware of the other information.
Why would you have said something about temptation?
Because, as I said earlier, my view, and very strong view, is that postmasters were very honest, hard-working, decent people. They didn't come in to defraud the business. There were occasional situations where, as I would say, the situations got the better of the postmaster, and I've got, you know, live examples of that from my own experience. And I would have said at that point, well, look, just remember these are very rare occasions. The other two I wouldn't have been able to comment on. And that's why I'm saying I don't remember a conversation in between those two things.
And then lastly, you were in the meeting when Ms Venables said these things, every case taken to court we win.
Yeah.
And Horizon, when examined and investigated, has never been found to be at fault. Did those things strike you in the course of the meeting? Hold on, the chief executive has gone off piste here.
Not really. I mean, I would have taken that as she has a broader knowledge than I have, and she's has information that I don't have, and that wouldn't be unusual. given my role, I mean, if you think my role in here was to talk to 2 cases, then I wouldn't have seen that as being unusual.
Can we take both of those down, please? Thank you. And turn to the second site initial investigation. I'm going to move through and not examine the process by which second site conducted its initial examinations and investigations, or the provision of information to it by the Post Office, but instead look at the response to the first second site report.
Okay.
Can we look, please, at poll 00115919? This is the briefing note to Ms Reynolds again, yes? You remember, in readiness for the second site report.
Yes.
To what extent were you involved in formulating this briefing?
I don't really remember, other than I'm trying to think of the timeline. So when with Project Sparrow and Belinda as the the program director for the project, then her and her team typically would have held the pen. But in terms of aspects that I was involved in, I would have fed into that. So it would have been a collective, usually a collective approach to get into the content of such a briefing. But I actually can't remember exactly on this one.
If we look at page 7, please, a passage that we haven't looked at before. So it's the foot of page 6, in fact. Can we see the forward strategy heading?
Yes.
And then if we go on to the following page, page 7, those 4 paragraphs. To what extent were you involved in formulating this forward strategy?
So I was involved in conversations. In terms of, was I a driving force in the strategy for this? No, I don't believe I was.
Who was the driving force in the strategy?
I'm trying to remember. So if we look at, in terms of meeting with James Arbuthnot, I think that would have been Alice, Paula, possibly Mark from the comms team, Mark Davis, possibly. But definitely in terms of the 38.
Can you speak up a bit, please?
Sorry, definitely in terms of the 38, in terms of the comms strategy. I don't know. I think in the early, my recollection of the early days of the conversations we had. So it would have been Alice, Paula, Susan, Leslie Seal would have been in at the start as well, and Simon Baker, myself. Would have been early conversations. But as in terms of driving this through, I can't recall exactly who. We had our areas of responsibility.
So plan A was to try and persuade Mr Arbuthnot to postpone a meeting with Second Sight. Plan B was to prepare what's described as a full communication strategy with rebuttal and tactics in line with an approach aimed to minimise reputational impact on the Post Office. Yes? Mm-hmm. Was that the strategy that was in fact adopted? Rebuttal and tactics aimed to minimise reputational impact?
I think in terms of the reputational impact, because the feeling was with Second Sight at this point that they weren't evidencing quite a bit of what they were claiming. So I think
Who was saying that they weren't evidencing what they were claiming?
Sorry?
Who was saying they were not evidencing what they were claiming?
So that was in terms of looking at what they were saying. They hadn't. So this is the interim report, isn't it? This is 8th of July interim report. So prior to this, there were 47 cases. that were really feeding into this, and that's through the spot reviews. But the time we got to the interim report, if I remember correctly, there were only 4 spot reviews that Second Sight were speaking to, and my memory of that is not one of those 4 cases has actually been concluded. So there wasn't an absolute outcome, and I think that's what was driving, and it was a collective view. I'm not saying anybody, it was a collective view that there's an issue being raised or an allegation being made. There's some investigating work being done, but actually they've not concluded that yet.
The interim report at least highlighted problems with Horizon, didn't it? Including the 2 anomalies as they were described.
Yes.
In fact, a third as well. Was there any consideration given within Post Office that should we look deeper into Horizon to see whether there are any other problems with it?
I don't think there was.
Was instead the first priority to be damage limitation and reputational management?
I don't think it was as stark as that. I think
Protect the brand at all costs.
no, that wasn't my sense at the time. My sense was this was the precursor to the scheme. We had done this was almost it was a year on from when Second Sight had been engaged. We'd had an awful lot of effort put into the investigations, but we had very little output. So this was about the fact that the rebuttal would be in as much as there's claims, allegations, but they're not being substantiated with the evidence because the investigations aren't concluded. I think that was the approach here, more than just an absolute brand limitation. That wasn't the driving force behind this, from my recollection.
Let's get rid of the independent investigators and get one of the big 4 involved. Paragraph 40.
Yeah.
Why was that the plan?
I think it was because, in my early recollection of before we engaged Second Sight, I remember being in some of the early conversations about what we should do in terms of approach, and at that point it was kind of one of the big 4. But that was dismissed in terms of preference going with Second Sight. And
why was the preference for Second Sight before they'd done their work?
Sorry, why do we go with Second Sight?
Yeah, before they'd started their work. Where did you go with them?
I'm not exactly sure. My take would be that that would have been less costly than getting one of the big 4s in. But also, I think, around addressing some of the other issues that were being claimed, that would be outside of the Horizon system itself, because as you've seen, the focus or the scope expanded when Second Sight got going and said we had to expand the scope, which is what we went with.
And why, after the independent reviewers had produced their independent report, was consideration being given to replacing them?
From my view, that was simply around cost and lack of output.
So one of the big 4 would be cheaper than Messrs Henderson and Warmington?
I'm not saying they'd be cheaper, but that I think we might get to a conclusion more quickly than we were seeing at this time, because this was a year on and we had very little output, but had spent quite a considerable amount of money.
Or was it that they were proving to be a little too independent for the Post Office?
Well, that certainly wasn't my take.
Or was it the take of anyone else?
I don't know. I mean, that certainly wasn't shared with me.
Did anyone blame Susan Crichton for suggesting them?
At the time, I didn't think so. I mean, I've obviously been listening to things this week.
Susan, you've got us these people in. They're a bit too independent for us. Why don't we go for one of the big 4
So that's not
who we can manage and control?
So that's not a conversation I was aware of. I do remember in the early conversations, Susan saying, I know these people. and quite clearly saying at the time, I'm not making any recommendations. I've worked with Ron. If you want me to, I can set up a meeting and you can take your own view. I do absolutely remember that conversation at the start. So what you've just said about there being too independent, that wasn't something that I was party to in terms of conversation. I was working quite closely with him at the time, particularly Ron. And yes, he was very challenging. And so they should be. I mean, that's what I expected them to do.
Were you aware of a suggestion that Susan Crichton had failed to mark second sight properly?
Not before listening to her evidence yesterday.
Were you aware of chatter within the business, rumblings, that Susan Crichton's job was on the line because she had, A, introduced reviewers who were a little too independent, and B, when they were introduced, had failed to mark them, i.e. control them?
That wasn't something I was aware of. And actually, Susan leaving was quite a shock to me.
Why did you think she left?
I suspected it was to do with the fact the second site weren't delivering the output in that time period.
So it was about the quality of second sight's work?
It was about the timeliness and I wouldn't say the quality, it was the quantity. The quantity. We weren't seeing the outputs. And
so she felt embarrassed that she had introduced second sight and they weren't producing enough work quickly enough.
That wasn't the impression I got from Susan.
Why did you think she left?
Look, I mean, I've listened to her evidence this week. I wasn't aware of what the conversations and what was going on in the background. I knew Susan had introduced second sight to the business. She hadn't recommended them, but she'd introduced them. And we were in that space of that was a good thing. I'd seen their pack, and they came across as being very credible. So I don't think I never personally thought she was ever embarrassed by anything that they were doing, but she was aware that we weren't getting the outputs that we thought we would by that time.
Can we turn on in the document, please, to Annex 1. Which provides an overview of the process. So if we move through the document to page 8, please. And if we look at the bottom part of this page, under the post office activity, it has provided continuous support to Second Sight and responded to all 10 spot reviews. It has, and then second bullet point from the bottom, liaised closely with Fujitsu so that its expertise on Horizon supports every response. And then lastly, collated and interrogated transaction records where Second Sight has referenced particular identifiable transactions. Taking those points in turn and bearing in mind you were, I think, responsible for managing the provision of information to Second Sight. Was it right that Post Office had liaised closely with Fujitsu so that its expertise supported every response that was made?
That wasn't me liaising with Fujitsu.
Sorry?
That wasn't me liaising with Fujitsu.
No, I didn't ask whether you were liaising with Fujitsu. I asked, do you know whether the Post Office liaised with Fujitsu to support every response?
My understanding was that yes. And I think at this time it was Simon Baker that was leading on that.
It records, secondly, that the Post Office collated and interrogated transaction records where Second Sight had referenced particular identifiable transactions. Did the Post Office only check transaction records?
For the spot reviews, I don't think so. I think we went wider. We certainly did in the Lepton case.
Why does this say then that the Post Office interrogated transaction records? I'm thinking in particular about event records or ARQ data.
And I'm trying to remember. So in the Lepton case, I did have a number of conversations with Ron on that one. Then we did actually get the ARC information, I think. It was definitely a more broader conversation because we needed to get more information to understand what had gone on in Lepton branch. I can't recall. Again, I think this would have been Simon facilitating this from Fujitsu.
Okay, were you aware of the extent to which audit data had been examined by Fujitsu for all of the spot reviews?
I can't say that I was.
Do you know if why that would not have been done?
I don't know why it wouldn't have been done because that is the approach that we adopted for the scheme, and this was the precursor to the scheme, so it might very well have been done, but I couldn't say that I was aware categorically.
I thought you were responsible for the management of the provision of information to Second Sight.
No, I did say I thought I said it. Wasn't responsible. I was facilitating the flow of information to Second Sight, but
So it came through you.
Some of it did, not all of it, but it was more of a collective approach. And Simon, from the IT team, because he was IT and change, I think it was Simon that was liaising with Fujitsu. Our contact at the time, I think, was Pete Newsom, who was the account manager from Fujitsu facing into Post Office.
If, as seems to be the case, the Post Office was utterly convinced that its system was robust, would there be any reason not to interrogate all of the data held by Fujitsu?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yes. If, as seems to be the case, the Post Office was completely convinced in the integrity of its system, the robustness of its system, would there be any reason not to investigate all of the data that Fujitsu held in relation to all of the spot reviews?
So I would have expected it to have been investigated.
The ARQ data, enhanced ARQ data?
I'm not sure about the enhanced ARC data at the time, but definitely the standard ARC.
Why are you not sure that the enhanced ARQ data would have been the subject of examination?
I don't know what they would have requested.
Who's they?
Again, it would have been Simon. I think it was Simon Baker in terms of liaison directly with Fujitsu.
But these paragraphs here are intended to give comfort, aren't they, to Ms. Reynolds, that Fujitsu have been closely involved and data has been obtained which backs up the Post Office's response to Second Sight, doesn't it?
I agree.
How could this have been signed off then without a full understanding of the extent to which Fujitsu did in fact assist the Post Office in the investigation of spot reviews?
And that might have been the case. So all I'm saying is I wasn't directly involved in that, and I'm not sure. I can't recall that absolutely was the case, but it very well might have been.
Thank you. That can come down. Can you remember a plan to ensure that the Post Office took on the role of investigating cases raised by sub-postmasters rather than Second Sight?
No.
To bring things under the Post Office's control and then remove Second Sight from the process completely?
So I've seen some information disclosed. And from memory, that certainly wasn't at the front of my mind. And other than if we were to go into a business as usual situation, because having established an approach, and I'm talking more about the scheme, I very much was of the view that we needed to embed that into business as usual so that we did have the support to be able to investigate issues. within branches that Sub Postmaster raised with us. But in terms of mid-scheme, I mean, yes, I was involved in some of the conversations, but I never saw that as a I'm not sure I saw as a reality, to be honest.
You weren't aware ever of a plan gently to ease second sight out of the equation?
I mean, I've seen documents that have said that, but that wasn't in the fore of my mind at all. I mean, I was working very closely with Second Sight on these cases.
Can we look, please, at poll 00381544? This is an email exchange to which you weren't party. It's a couple of weeks after what we've been looking at just now. And it's an email exchange between Mr. Baker and Miss Venables. He was leaving, yes?
Yes, and I wasn't sure of the timeline, but I can see this would have been close to it, yeah.
Few closing thoughts. Here they are, nothing radical. And his first indented paragraph, the primary focus has to be proving to JFSA and MPs that we can take on the role of independently investigating cases. Just stopping there, can you conceive of any circumstances in which the Post Office could ever independently investigate itself?
No.
The sub-postmasters were making allegations against the Post Office, weren't they?
Yes.
The sub-postmasters were making allegations against the Post Office's system, weren't they?
Yes.
The Post Office could never independently investigate them, could it?
Nope.
And if you'd seen this, would you think that's just absurd babble?
So when I saw that for the first time, which I think was this week, I was amazed at the content.
He continues, that way we can start to bring things under our control. That was always the plan, wasn't it? A concern amongst senior leadership. It was a bad thing if investigation of complaints were not under the Post Office's control.
So that wasn't my take on. So when I got involved at the start in the early conversations, it was about genuinely getting to the truth, getting under the skin and understanding whether there was any substance to the claims that were being made by mostly former postmasters at the time. So, you know, this is, as I said, I found this quite amazing. You know, I was startled by what I'd seen in here. And that wasn't why I'd voluntarily got involved, because I did step into this of my own volition.
Was the Post Office's concern that if things are not under our control and are instead a little too independent, we can't influence the outcomes of them?
Well, from the disclosure I've seen, then I can see that, but I wasn't a party to those conversations. You know, I genuinely believed when we engaged Second Sight, it was for genuine reasons, but I think we didn't expect it to have gone on as long as it did. But saying that, the cases were much more complex to investigate than I think anybody anticipated at the start. I'm sorry, I'm probably drifting a little bit more into the scheme here.
I.e. the concern was we want control over the process, and then in that way we can have control over the substance of conclusions.
Again, that wasn't my view.
The suggestion is that the plan to do this is to augment Second Sight with Post Office resources, build up our credibility, and then at the right time remove Second Sight. That's what happened, isn't it?
Well, in terms, are you referring to what, closing the scheme? Again, all I can say, I wasn't aware that this was the plan.
It was the early plan, according to this.
But I wasn't part of that conversation.
And if we look at the next paragraph, the strategy was said to fall almost entirely upon your shoulders.
And that certainly wasn't what I was aware of.
At this time, which is the end of August, did you know that it was the Post Office's plan to remove Second Sight?
I mean, I'd been in some meetings, I can't remember which ones, where it was reported about concern about Second Sight rising cost, not getting the outputs, and there were some alternatives being mooted about, bringing in some additional resource. But it's only through the disclosure process I've seen the extent of some of those conversations.
Was the concern that they were a little too independent for the Post Office?
I didn't think so. As I've said, it was about the level of output and the cost. I didn't think it was about their independence, because I was part of the working group and they were clearly, their role was to be independent. And that's how we operated.
According to Mr. Baker, the strategy was going to fall on you. You were seemingly in charge of easing Second Sight into the wings and then out of the equation. Were you ever told that you held that role?
No. I said this was a complete shock when I saw this.
Did you ever do anything to carry that strategy into effect?
I don't think so. I mean, I was there to investigate the issues from postmasters. I mean, again, overlap with the initial inquiry for the spot reviews and then going into the scheme. My role was to lead the team to do those investigations as thoroughly as we could. In the initial inquiry with the spot reviews, I only had a couple of people doing that. And then we built, then obviously going into the scheme.
You'd worked very closely with Mr. Baker, hadn't you?
No,
No?
not before getting involved with this, no.
No, I'm talking about in the Second Sight
Oh, sorry.
investigations. You told us already that he was responsible
Yes.
for the IT side of the provision of information.
So the first time I met Simon Baker was when we were having the early conversations, which would have been in 2012. Throughout that period, which would have been about a year if he left in August, then I did work quite closely with him at that point.
So for a year or so, you'd worked closely with him on the Second Sight project.
Yes.
Do you know how it was that he seems to have held the view that the focus had to be to bring things under the Post Office's control and then at the right time remove Second Sight without having told you of it?
I mean, Simon was having lots of conversations with Paula and I presume Alice. He was working to Leslie Sewell at the time. I can't remember when Leslie left either. But that's certainly not a conversation he had with me.
Ultimately, the Post Office did remove Second Sight.
Once we'd completed the investigations into the scheme cases, yeah.
Are you saying that was unrelated to the plan that's described here?
As far as I was concerned, yes. But again, I hadn't seen this.
It's a bit like the email of the 5th of December. It comes as a bit of a shock to you.
No, it's different. I mean, that 5th of December was sent to me. I just hadn't read it. This was never sent to me, I don't believe, because I've definitely never seen this. And this, I think, is a private note from Simon to Paula. So this is different altogether.
Thank you. That can come down. To your mind, did the Second Sight interim report of the 8th of July 2013 raise concerns over the integrity of Horizon?
I think going back to my earlier comment is that there were allegations and issues being raised without it being supported with the evidence. So in that respect, it wasn't conclusive. but it did raise concerns at that point.
Concerns that needed to be investigated.
Yes.
It raised the existence of 3 bugs that had operated in the past.
Well, we disclosed the bugs to them, so in that respect it gave, I suppose what it did do is it brought,
And
it
sorry,
made it public.
on that, do you know who disclosed the bugs to them? There's quite a few people claiming credit for disclosing the bugs.
So my understanding was it was Simon Baker who provided the information to Second Sight, but I've seen other things that say that that's different, but my recollection from the time was that's how it was.
And so there was some credit for Poll there, Post Office there, because this was voluntary disclosure without pressure from Second Sight. Is that right?
I presume so.
You were aware at this time that the Post Office had prosecuted very many people in the past based on Horizon evidence.
I wouldn't say very many. I was aware of some.
What was your impression of how many people the Post Office had prosecuted in the last, say, 13 and a half years?
I'm not sure at that point I had a number. Clearly I've seen the number since, but my early recollection is that I wouldn't have been aware of the number of cases at a national level. It would only been the ones that I would have been involved in or close to.
Even if it was some cases, you would have been aware that the information in the Second Sight report and the revelation of the bugs may have impacted on those prosecutions.
As I said earlier, I wasn't close to the conviction, the process for the convictions. And
Can you help us what you did do? So far today, that you said you weren't close to many things.
no, I've said the prosecutions, I was not involved in prosecutions.
Not involved in briefing, not involved in IT, not involved in the provision of information concerning Horizon to Second Sight, not involved in investigating those early complaints about Horizon that I raised, not involved in considering the impact of the Second Sight report on convictions. What were you doing at this time?
So I had a separate role as well. So I was doing whatever my business as usual role was, and then I was working closely on, at this point, on the spot reviews with Second Sight.
Did anyone say to you, we might have a problem here? Some of our prosecutions have been based on Horizon data, and that data may not enjoy the integrity that we thought it did, sufficient for criminal court purposes. Something needs to be done about that.
So my understanding of how the cases that had been prosecuted, the conviction, the cases that had been gone to court, was that they had been properly investigated at the time.
Where did you get that understanding from, that the cases resulting in conviction had been properly investigated?
That was my general understanding of the approach to prosecution. So there was my
Where did
understanding.
you get that understanding from?
I must have asked somebody because I'd never seen a policy on there. But my understanding from just growing up in the business, as it were, is that the process was quite rigorous. It was investigated by the security and investigation team. It had oversight from our internal legal team, and it would have been Royal Mail in the early days. Any case that was being put forward had external legal advice on it as well, and then it came back into the post office to get general counsel's sign off. So
Where did you get that, in some respects, faulty understanding from?
I'd been speaking to people. I mean, as we went through and I can't remember the exact timeline, but as we went through the process, I remember having a conversation with Roderick Williams to say, and particularly when I found out about Gareth Jenkins, and that's probably later, but and I remember saying to him, so what's the impact then? And his response to me was, oh, it's fine, we've got QC looking at it, or we had look at, so they've looked at the implications on the past convictions. So for me, then I'd satisfied myself that was in hand, and that was outside my area of scope or knowledge, and I took it at face value from the legal team.
You said there when you became aware of the issue relating to Gareth Jenkins.
Yes.
What was the issue that you became aware of?
So it was that Gareth, we wouldn't be using Gareth in any cases going forward. And
Were you told why?
not to the extent that I've seen now.
What were you told as to why
So again,
you were using him?
I'd asked Rod, and he said, oh, there was an issue with some of the evidence.
This is Rod Williams.
Sorry, Roderick Williams. And I worked quite closely with Roderick Williams throughout all of the spot review and into the scheme, and then the GLO. His response to me was that there was an issue with the evidence he'd given. We've had a QC, as it was at the time, look at that, and there's no issue. It's all been looked at, and there's no issue, but we won't be using him as a witness going forward.
So there's no issue?
In respect of the cases, the past cases.
What did you understand there to be meant by there is no issue?
That they were safe. The convictions were safe. Didn't need to be reopened.
And why were you being told this?
Because I'd asked.
Why had you asked?
Because it didn't sound normal run of the course that we had been using a witness in cases, and we at that point were still prosecuting, and there were still cases going forward, but we were no longer using the witness that we had used previously. So I wanted to understand why that was.
What did it got to do with you?
Because I was concerned at that point.
So you were concerned with the Post Office's prosecution practices?
I was concerned about the fact that why would we not be using a witness that we had been using previously? So there was something not quite right about that. And I asked the question, and I probably didn't probe deep enough, but I got a response that satisfied me in terms of my knowledge that we'd had QC look at that, assess, and the verdict was that everything was okay.
Can we look, please, at poll 406375? Oh, that's the wrong reference. If you forgive me a moment, Ms. Madam Bogerd.
Okay.
Sir. Whilst Mr. Blake helps me on that, but were you provided with a copy of an advice written by a barrister called Simon Clark concerning Gareth Jenkins?
No.
When was the first time that you saw that?
In this pack, disclosure pack.
So in the last few weeks?
Yes.
What did you think when you read it?
Well, it certainly filled more gaps, in terms of reason why, and it certainly had more significance than what I recalled had been relayed to me.
Why was it more significant than had been relayed to you?
Because, and I'm not familiar with all the language used in that, but because it had implications on the cases, and that he had breached his code, his duty to the court. I'm sorry to say I'm not familiar with the terminology, but that was, very significant in terms of what I read.
Thank you. Poll 406357. I think that's what I called out. Ah, perfect. Thank you. If we just look at the last page of this, please. and scroll down, we can see it's dated the 15th of July 2013.
Yes.
And if we go back to paragraph 37, which is up a couple of pages, I think. What does all this mean? In short, it means, and I'm going to insert the right words here, Gareth Jenkins has not complied with his duties to the court, the prosecution or the defence. 38, the reasons why Gareth Jenkins failed to comply with this duty are beyond the scope of this review. The effects of the failure must be considered. I advise the following to be the position. Gareth Jenkins failed to disclose material known to him, but which undermines his expert opinion. The failure is in plain breach of his duty as an expert witness. Accordingly, Gareth Jenkins' credibility as an expert witness is fatally undermined. He should not be asked to provide expert evidence in any current or future prosecution. Similarly, in those current and ongoing cases where Gareth Jenkins has provided an expert witness statement, he should not be called upon to, over the page, give that evidence. Rather, we should seek a different independent expert. Notwithstanding the failure is that of Gareth Jenkins and arguably Fujitsu, this failure has a profound effect upon Post Office and its prosecutions, not least by reason of Gareth Jenkins' failure. Material which should have been disclosed to the defendants was not disclosed, thereby placing the Post Office in breach of their duties as a prosecutor. By reason of the failure to disclose, there are a number of now convicted defendants to whom the existence of bugs should have been disclosed but was not. Those defendants remain entitled to have disclosure of that material, notwithstanding their convicted status. I've already advised on the need to conduct a review of all Post Office prosecutions. That review is presently underway. There are a number of current cases where there's been no disclosure where they ought to have been. Here we must disclose the existence of the bugs to those defendants where the test for disclosure is met. Where a convicted defendant or his lawyers consider the failure to disclose material reveals an arguable ground of appeal, he may seek the leave of the Court of Appeal to challenge his conviction. Was it reading those paragraphs in particular that caused you concern when you got this recently?
It all caused me concern, actually. But
Sorry?
it all caused me concern because that, when I asked the question, that wasn't the response that I got.
What's said here is not consistent with the assurance that you got, is it?
No, it's not.
And so I'm clear about it, this assurance, from whom did that come?
It was from a conversation I had with Roderick Williams. I can't remember.
That conversation in the context of how this advice should be dealt with, if at all, in the disclosure to Second Sight.
So I wasn't aware of this advice at the time, and I said I've only just seen this document. The conversation I had with Roderick was about, and I don't know exactly when it was, but it was at the point at which I learned that we were no longer we couldn't use Gareth Jenkins as a witness in future cases. And it was at that point I'd asked Roderick, well, why and what does that mean? And that's the response I got from Roderick. But I don't remember the time, but I certainly had not seen this advice.
Do you think, looking at the conclusions that were reached in this advice, you ought to have been told about it?
Yes, I do.
And is that because of the role that you were then performing?
Well, in July, we were moving into the scheme. So we launched the mediation scheme in the August. And there were discussions in the working group about the safety of the prosecutions, the cases. And again, I still wasn't brought into this detail at all.
And the inquiry has got evidence that the advice that we're looking at was sent to Martin Smith of Cartwright King,
Okay.
to Susan Crichton, the then General Counsel,
Okay.
To Roderick Williams, to Hugh Flemington, to Andrew Parsons, to Simon Richardson, to John L. Singh, and to Gavin Matthews. Did any of those people draw its conclusions to your attention?
No.
Did any one of them...
Sorry, there's two on that list I don't know. The Gavin and the... Sorry, the last...
Gavin Matthews.
I don't recall that name at all.
Yes.
And not the next one up, but the one up above that.
Andrew Parsons, you knew who
No, I
he
knew
was.
Andrew Parsons.
Simon Richardson?
Didn't know Simon Richardson. Everybody else I'm aware of. But no, I did not have this information brought to my attention.
You, I think, carried on having extensive dealings with Andrew Parsons over the years,
Yes.
right up until 2020.
Yes.
And not a thing was mentioned by him
No.
about this, about the reasons why the Post Office had to sack Gareth Jenkins.
Well, I don't think Post Office actually sacked Gareth. Well, he worked for Jitsu anyway, but Gareth Jenkins...
Sack him as shorthand. Stop using him as a witness in any of its cases.
So I didn't have that. I don't think I had that conversation with Andy Parsons, but we did use Gareth Jenkins in the GLO.
You're ahead of me again, Miss.
Sorry, apologies.
In that context, did anyone say, including Mr. Parsons, hold on, we've been advised that, this is my summary, not theirs, that Mr. Jenkins is a tainted witness whose reliability has been found on advice to be compromised.
Not that
Therefore, we can't use him in any capacity.
No, not that I remember. And the words tainted, that as I said, my recollection of my conversation with Roderick, and it was Roderick, and I don't believe I had a conversation with Andy because I wouldn't have raised it because I'd had a response from Roderick, was that there was an issue with his evidence and therefore we can no longer use him as a witness, which is very different to what you just said.
The advice can come down from the screen. Tainted, incidentally, was a word used by the QC that you mentioned, Brian Altman, Casey. That expression was never used, even in the context of the GLO and the assistance that Mr. Jenkins was providing in the GLO.
Not that I can remember.
Were you aware of a further advice written by Mr. Clark dealing with the suggestion that a member of the Post Office had given an instruction to destroy or to shred evidence and not to write anything down in order to avoid disclosure duties to the court?
I wasn't when I was... I've seen it as part of the disclosure pack. I wasn't aware that we'd had advice. I was aware of the shredding situation, but I wasn't aware that the advice had been given.
Okay, what were you aware about the shredding situation?
So and I'm sorry, I'm struggling with some of the times here. So Gail Peacock, who was working with me at the time, had been attending the Horizon, I think it was a weekly call or meeting.
So a weekly Wednesday hub?
Something, yeah, I can't remember the exact details. I never was involved in those meetings, but Gail Peacock, who was because Gail worked for me in the branch support program, I think it was around that time. And she mentioned to me that John Scott had given this instruction.
Did she say how she knew that it was John Scott who'd given the instruction?
She said it was John Scott.
Yes, did she say how she knew that it was John Scott? Was she giving you the impression that he had given the instruction to her?
I can't remember. But she said to me, John Scott. Now, whether he was in the meeting or not, I don't know, because I said I wasn't in the meeting. But it was a case of John Scott had given this instruction and just disbelief, if I'm honest, about that.
What was your understanding as to what was done about the shredding instruction given by the head of security?
My understanding was that Susan Crichton intervened and put a message out there that clearly should not happen. Not that I ever think, I don't even know whether anybody did destroy anything, because I'm sure Gail wouldn't have at the time. So, but Susan intervened and put that straight, was my recollection of it.
So thank you. That is a convenient moment to break, if it's convenient for you, until I think 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Well, I think you may know, Mr. Beer, that my assessors and I will be there tomorrow in the hearing room.
Yes.
We, I think, can leave it at 9:45, but to a small extent, there is, of course, a risk that the train from South Wales may be late. But I think we'll leave it at 9:45. And if the worst happens, you'll just have to wait for me for a few minutes. But if it's on time, we'll be on time.
Thank you very much. So 9:45 then. Thank you.
Before I break, Ms. Van den Bogerd, it is customary for me to tell witnesses who are adjourned overnight that they shouldn't speak about their evidence. I no doubt you've heard that before.
Yes, sir.
I no doubt you don't want to speak about your evidence, so please comply with that request.
I will, thank you.
Thank you, sir.